With the end of the year being right around the corner, I want to make as many videos about as many high quality dividend growth style and or growth style ETFs that could be potentially perfect foundational positions, especially for newer dividend investors or growth investors long term. So this video is going to be no different. I want to talk about the VOO ETF, the Vanguard S&P 500 ETF, one of the best ETFs across the entire market if you ask me. We're going to go over exactly what this ETF is, how it works, why it's so darn popular, but then later on I'm going to share with you the exact math and numbers behind what a single $50,000 investment would turn into later on if it was simply invested into one ETF, ticker symbol VOO. I promise you one thing, these numbers are going to shock you because a $50,000 investment into VOO can potentially turn into a boatload of cash later on. So if you're considering building out a long-term portfolio and want to learn more about some of the best ETFs of all time, make sure to stick around, drop a like down below, and let's get right into this one. Real quick, for those that haven't already, make sure to go to the first link in my description and grab my new dividend investing ebook where I share exactly how I went from $0 invested to now earning over $6,000 on a monthly basis and over $1 million invested in the markets. Along with the ebook, you're also going to receive my custom dividend tracker where you can track your dividend progress on an ongoing basis and reach your dividend investing goals. So make sure to grab yourself a copy of my dividend investing ebook and the new dividend tracker today. It's the first link in my description. So for those of you guys that aren't very familiar with the Vanguard S&P 500 ETF, I'm sure at this point you probably have at least heard of it. We're talking about ticker symbol VOO, which comes to us from Vanguard. Now Vanguard is very well known and respected, especially from long-term investors, and this is because their funds have done very well historically. And they're also very cheap to hold on to with an expense ratio of 0.03%. VOO is giving you exposure to the S&P 500 without barely costing you anything. Now the product summary for VOO is pretty straightforward. I'm sure again a lot of you guys probably know this, but listen in if you don't. This ETF invests in stocks in the S&P 500, representing 500 of the largest US companies and also some of the best companies in the world. The goal is to closely track the index's return, which is considered a gauge of the overall US stock returns. This is another reason on why VOO is so popular. If VOO goes down in price, the rest of the stock market probably is also. So as long as the stock market keeps moving up like it kind of has historically, VOO will probably be front leading everything. Now it also says offers high potential for investment growth. Share value rises and falls more sharply than that of funds holding bonds. More appropriate for long-term goals where your money growth is essential. So even though my investment strategy and a lot of my videos are focused around more dividends, dividend growth, or even income investing at times, VOO is an ETF that does pay a dividend, it does pay you income, but this ETF is going to be focused a lot more around growth. And even if you are a more dividend income focused investor, holding onto an ETF like this one, in my opinion, is not bad whatsoever. Now, another important aspect about VOO, of course, is the portfolio composition. How many stocks are in this ETF? As we know, it's going to be 500 more or less because it tracks the S&P. Now, the weighted exposures, the holding breakdown as far as sectors go, we're talking around 9% communication services, 10% consumer discretionary, around 5.9% consumer staples, energy is around 3%, financials is around 13%, healthcare is almost 12%, industrials is 8.5%, information technology is 31.7%. Then we have a smaller portion of the fund being things like materials, other real estate, and utilities. So overall, this fund is very well diversified. It gives you exposure to pretty much everything you're going to need, especially if you're just starting out. Now, the top names within VOO are names like Apple, names like Microsoft, Nvidia, Amazon, we got Facebook, we got Alphabet, we got Berkshire, and then we have Broadcom and Tesla. Again, names that are going to be more growth focused, so if that's not necessarily something you want the most exposure to, then maybe VOO isn't right for you. But like I said, even if you are more of a dividend income focused investor, having part of your portfolio on the side invest into VOO, especially if you're relatively young, is probably something you're not going to regret. Now here's the fun part, looking at the performance of VOO over time. This is where it gets kind of crazy. Year to date, VOO is up around 20%. On the 1 year, almost 40%, the 3 year, 9%, the 5 year, 15%, 10 year, 13%, and since inception. This is why so many investors always say, just sit on your hands and buy VOO and chill. 14.53% on average since inception, which makes VOO, the Vanguard S&P 500 ETF, very, very hard to outperform. Now you just heard about VOO's performance over multiple different timeframes, but seeing it on the chart is honestly even crazier. Looking at the growth of this ETF over time. I mean, a few years ago, VOO was trading in the low 300s. Now it's at $5.50 a share. This ETF has grown just about as fast as anything throughout the markets. Also crazy to think back in 2010, which again was only around 14 or 15 years ago, we're talking VOO has not doubled, but it's not tripled. It's up over 5 times more or less from where it was trading around 14 years ago. And this is exactly how generational wealth can be built, by buying into high quality ETFs that, at least historically like this one, have done very well. Now, I know a lot of you guys are still concerned about dividend income, which I definitely am as well. VOO offers around a 1.24% trailing 12-month dividend yield and a dividend growth rate of around 7% on average, which means even though VOO has grown like crazy over time, making investors very, very rich, this ETF has still also paid investors more and more in dividend income over the years. But now to get to the fun part, to cut to the chase, we're looking at a $50,000 investment into VOO, which offers an initial dividend yield of around 1.24%, a 7.2% expected annual dividend amount increase, a 12% expected annual share price appreciation, a 30-year investment time frame, $1,200 on top of the $50K invested per year. So basically this is saying an investor is going to drop $50K into VOO, wait 30 years, reinvest the dividends along the way, and see what's going to happen later on. Now, like I promised you, these numbers are pretty shocking, so listen in. A $50,000 initial principal into VOO is going to earn an investor around $600 per year in dividends, and after those dividends are reinvested, along with the $1,200 annual contribution and the increase in VOO's price, we're talking $58,000 or just shy of it by year number 2. Now, skipping right ahead, it's not going to take long at all for this portfolio that started at $50K to now turn into $100,000 in principal, and again, these numbers are all just to be estimated. This is all just theoretical. By 10 years in, this portfolio that started off at $50K is now worth over $167,000 potentially, which is insane. Now, by 15 years in, if an investor just bought $50K worth of VOO, reinvested the dividends, bought $1,200 more worth of VOO per year, it would take 15 years for the portfolio to surpass $311,000, which at this point you're now getting into the realm of some big money in a big portfolio, and this only took 15 years so far. Now, by 20 years, the portfolio is now over $569,000, which at this point, depending on your expenses, you could potentially even retire early. Now, 30 years down the road, if an investor bought $50K worth of VOO, reinvested those dividends along the way, and just let VOO compound and compound and compound, we're talking $2 million of new balance after 30 years of investing and letting VOO compound like crazy. Now, I know what some of you guys might be thinking, well, how do we know that VOO is going to keep growing like it has historically? Maybe their dividends will get smaller, or maybe the overall growth of VOO will be stunted. And of course, that's always the case in any investment. You don't know necessarily what's going to happen in the future of any ETF or stock to be certain. But if you do believe in some of the best companies and biggest companies across the entire world, and if you do think they're going to keep growing, making money, and making investors very, very rich, then buying into something as simple yet as powerful as the Vanguard S&P 500 ETF could be a good option to look into. Now, lastly, before I go, I wanted to leave you guys with one more piece of data just to show you how powerful VOO is. With a $10,000 investment, and this is back in 2010, and dividends reinvested along the way, an investor would have turned a $10,000 initial investment into $67,000+. This is over 14 or so years. Think about that, just a $10,000 investment almost worth $70,000 just within 14 or so years. So now that we talked about VOO, the Vanguard S&P 500 ETF, I share with you guys how the ETF works, what I like about it, and definitely why it's one of the most popular ETFs across the entire markets. Along with the fact that a $50,000 investment initially could potentially turn into over $2 million during a 30-year time frame. I lastly, most importantly, want to hear from you guys down below. As far as a foundational ETF position in your long-term portfolio, meaning an ETF that you've held onto for a while that you're continuing to buy to build out as a long-term position, which is your favorite across the entire market, drop the ticker symbol in my comments down below. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to please drop a like on it and subscribe for more future content like this. Thanks as always for stopping by, and if you are interested in investing, make sure to check out these recent videos I posted right here.